It is Friday, February 27th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Requiem episode of LTPS. I'm pretty sure I've already used that one, but that game is out alongside a lot of other things going on this weekend. So as a little PSA, we do have the Marathon Open Playtest going on. Invites were sent out, and they're already starting for Horizon Hunters Gathering, so that's a closed playtest. Seems like not that many people got into that, but that is going on. For Loop, I think, also has playtests going on this weekend, and then RE Requiem. So a lot happening. Whatever you're playing, enjoy it. And we have a lot of other PlayStation news stories to go over. So let's begin, as always, with a brief PSA. Last call for the monthly games for February. These are going away. March 3rd, it's going to change over to PGA Tour 2K25 PS5, Slime Rancher 2 PS5, Monster Hunter Rise PS4, PS5, and Elder Scrolls Online, the Gold Road Collection PS4, PS5 as well. So 4 titles total. Now, in particular for the Elder Scrolls Online, that's every expansion up to 2024's Golden Road, so you don't get the 2025 content pack, but that is a substantial time sink, so be careful playing that game. But Slime Rancher, good. Monster Hunter Rise, definitely good. Not quite to the same degree as other Monster Hunter titles. And PGA Tour, I think, is a very easy write-off for a lot of people. It's very particular. In the weirdest way possible, like, I do like golf games, so I'll take that. I'm probably not going to start it or play it anytime soon. But, I do enjoy having that bonus title if there is a sports title in the 3 monthly games. Give us 4 in that case if you're going to headline it with a sports game. Anyway, moving on to a new PS5 system software beta where the invites are already sent out. And you can slow your roll because usually betas sound exciting, but we've seen the previous few betas. Sony is pretty much done doing substantial firmware updates for PlayStation 5 unless they're probably parental controls or security related, because this one, get ready for these line items. You ready? This firmware that they're testing is for Unicode 17.0 emojis. Those are now supported. And then they've improved the messages and usability on some screens, and they've improved system software performance and stability. They have to actually run a beta for this for 2-ish something months, and then it'll go live for everybody. So yeah, I think they're pretty much done with the more substantial updates, although they've certainly been making more minor changes to things like the Welcome Hub and quality of life updates for the PlayStation Store, which that's a good segue to one of our other stories, is that they are making another change to what you see on the store listing for particular games. Now, if you remember prior, we had that visibility update where Sony rolled out that notice that showed you the lowest price for a game in the last 30 days. Well, now there's going to be a new text above that notice, which informs people of a game's launch price. And this feature should be rolling out globally, server-side to everybody. I don't have it right now, but it would show you the launch price and then the lowest price the last 30 days. So this is, again, a great step in the right direction. Crucially, what we really, really need is the lowest price the game has ever had. Now, there's still a bunch of various websites online that scrap this data from PSN, so you can see, like, over time, the lowest price for a game, and then the launch price. So we're, like, missing the most important thing here that will make the PS Store so much more usable, like, directly on console or on web, without having to go to a third party. So they're almost there, and hopefully we'll get that at some point. The launch price is helpful, but, we're still missing some key data. Now, speaking of sales and pricing, this is also a good little PSA here, but if you didn't notice, PlayStation is running a sale until March 9th, I believe, on various games and accessories. So PSVR 2 is $300 USD, PS Studio games are $30 from their usual full $70 MSRP. The Yote and DS2 collector's editions are $100 off, which it seems like nowadays with those big box collector's editions, if you want them, it's kind of a safe bet to not buy them right away because you can get them substantially cheaper much later. And then there's deals going on for the console covers, third-party accessories. The overpriced SSDs are slightly less overpriced. So if you're in the market, now might be a decent time without having to wait probably another 5-something years when all this stuff cools down, if ever. But yeah, a little PSA there. Let's move on to some PlayStation Studio news, which we have some big updates going on. Namely, we had PlayStation be very quiet on social media for about 3 days after the Bluepoint closure news. then they come back, and then Insomniac also hits us with a confirmed release date for Marvel's Wolverine. So that game is officially coming out September 15th, 2026. Which is certainly unusual that they came out of nowhere on a random Tuesday, which Sony does love their random Tuesdays. Just seemingly out of nowhere, they will drop very substantial news stories on Tuesdays, but at least for a big headline first-party title like Wolverine, almost always, as far as I can remember, they are usually accompanied by a release date trailer, and either that trailer is something that's on its own, but it can also be a part of a state of play or some other kind of presentation. So it is definitely a bit unusual. I know people are wondering, like, is this them trying to sort of move blame away or take some eyes off the Bluepoint situation? I don't know, but it certainly did strike me as unusual. With that said, though, we now have a very good picture of Sony's lineup for this calendar year, because Marathon is coming out March 5th, Saros coming out April 30th, Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls August 6th, now we have Wolverine September 15th, we do still have Kena Scars of Cosmora recently announced, and that is coming out this year, so that doesn't have a date as a PS Studio title, but we've definitely got a handful of things that we now know for certain when they're coming out, which also clearly paint a picture of avoiding that crater of GTA 6 later in the year. Now, speaking more on the Bluepoint stuff, I think we would be remiss to not acknowledge one report that came out this past week, alleging to go over what happened within Bluepoint, speaking with former staff, various projects and remakes that they pitched that Sony said no to, and they didn't know they were working on a God of War Live service thing, and it's kind of a thorough report, which that on its own makes it a red flag, and so this is one of those things where it's a great opportunity to reiterate my personal stance on when rumors like this gain a little bit too much traction, because typically if there's not that much noise around it, and I know it's not really a good source, we'll just not even humor it or talk about it on LTPS. Sometimes if there is something where even if I don't consider it a good source, maybe there's a good talking point, like then sometimes we'll bring it up and I'll even say, like, I don't think that's a good source, but let's talk about this still because it might be something worth humoring. In this situation, just to acknowledge it, yes, I've seen it. There's not many PlayStation news stories that do not go over my head whether the source is good or not. But we've already seen a handful of people call out this report, whether that's, I don't think Peter Dalton, the head of technology at Bluepoint, called out this post in particular, but he's already been kind of signaling very discreetly that what you're hearing online isn't the full picture. And then Reese Riley called out this post as BS. Nate the Hate says that there's some truths mixed in, but it doesn't fully align, which that's the thing too. The report is so long and saying so many specific things that there's surely maybe a handful of things that are accurate to a degree. Very similar to my own speculation. You know, the reason that these reports are often really hard to digest too is that they are too specific, and so that is like NDA breaking for a lot of employees that are involved at these studios. I find it really hard to believe that they picked up that much of the full outline of what went down with Bluepoint, you know what I mean? So it's one of those things where you always have to be very careful about what you see online. And, there's oftentimes with independent people, there's no accountability. They can simply make things up, draft up their own picture. It's nothing, personal, obviously, but I'm just saying I would consider this post and this report to not be entirely accurate and to not pay it too much attention. I would love to see maybe some more insight within Bluepoint down the road, but I'm just not sure we're going to be getting that anytime soon, or at least if we do, it likely would come from somewhere else. Now, with that in mind, let's go over some rumors that are worth speculating over and talking about, like, for example, this one from Giant Bomb's Jeff Grubb, recently speaking on a Game Mess Mornings Decides episode, where he was talking about how he had heard that Gran Turismo 7 is running on Switch 2 hardware, that Polyphony Digital and PlayStation got the game running on Switch 2, and he only said that he doesn't think the game is coming to Switch 2, and there's nothing really else that he added there, just personally he thinks the game is not coming, but that is something that they're toying around with internally. Which that does track as far as, developers doing that. I mean, the most famous one that people tend to remember is Epic getting Gears 3 running on PS3 hardware way back in the day. But the other one was MGS4 running on Xbox 360. Sometimes these games have no intention of going to those other platforms, but they do tend to do that internally and benchmark those titles. And in the case of PlayStation, they have a local play PlayStation handheld, a low power handheld that they're planning on launching. At some point in time, I know obviously that stuff is really up in the air as far as the timing, because we don't know when mainline PS6 or this handheld will come out because of the RAM crisis and the pricing of this potential hardware, but I think it would be a very reasonable and safe benchmark to think that a lot of the first-party teams are maybe using Switch 2 hardware to see what they can get running reasonably in a sort of real world environment, especially more so when you think that by the time they ship hardware, it is going to be punching a bit above over its weight of a Switch 2, for example. The only thing that I think is maybe more interesting here is that they have Switch 2 dev kits, which we've heard is hard to get a hold of, and also they have the low power mode in existence right now. So I don't know if it's a matter of like that particular game, they're sort of working on that proper native version, because the low power mode is still sort of a safeguard in the here and now for PS5 titles. It's not necessarily a native handheld mode. It's more of a safety net compatibility layer for whatever sort of efficiency the SoC will have by the time it does ship in games that don't have a native portable mode. Gran Turismo 7, for example, might be getting benchmarked as a proper native experience for that handheld. And it might be too early, as in they don't have like targeted dev kits for this handheld. First party would be the first ones to get a hold of that stuff, but I would think Switch 2 is maybe a good benchmark. Now, a big rumor that just came out yesterday is about PlayStation possibly pulling back on their single-player PC games. So what happened here is that we had both John Linneman of Digital Foundry and Jason Schreier of Bloomberg talking about this on their podcasts just yesterday. So Jason, for example, on the Triple Click podcast said he would not be surprised if Wolverine never came to PC, and he said straight up that yeah, he thinks they're going to stop putting the big PS Studio single player games on PC. Now, clarifying further over on Reset Era on a thread discussing this very speculation, he chimed in posting saying, quote, "I mean, it's not speculation, but sometimes topics come up on the show before I'm quite ready to publish a story about them. More to come soon, I'm sure. Thanks for listening to Triple Click. This week's episode was a lot of fun." So this is surprising to me for a number of reasons. I mean, it's been a point of contention for PlayStation for a long time of them doing these PC releases. After 2 years, then 1 year, sometimes they come sooner than others, and people are thinking it might be day and date, and I thought actually that's what they were getting to at some point, because we have so much indicating that it's not really harming the PlayStation business the way people have thought that it would, because we have the numbers now, and I assume PlayStation has the numbers, and that PS5 is still selling like it normally would compared to PS4. It's a very successful, profitable generation, and these games in particular need more money because they need more revenue because they're costly. The single player games are just ballooning in budget, and so even though we have that number on the balance sheet now where Sony tells us exactly how much money their entire non-PlayStation console games make, and it's like $1.5 something billion over the last 4 years, which that does seem very inconsequential, but the point I always make there is that individual studios and the individual games have their own profit and loss statement, so that might seem like a small sum for the entire organization, but you cut that money up across all those games, and they might need that extra 5 to 10% just to help cash flow for the studio and for them to keep making games, right? So these things have to be viewed in a different lens. It is definitely still a small sum of money when you consider that, though, right? That, and also the novelty has worn off on PlayStation Studio games on PC. So we've seen a lot of these sequels just seemingly off of CCU counts on Steam. We know that's not the best metric to look at, but they still telegraph a pretty obvious trend of it being heavily downward. So people are not buying and playing these games nearly as much on PC as they were when they initially came out. So the novelty's worn off, but there's still like, we've had so much to suggest otherwise, right? We had rumors about God of War Sons of Sparta possibly being a multi-platform candidate. Helldivers 2, of course, made them actually ship a game on Xbox willingly because it's a live service game, and we think that live service games probably is not what we're talking about here, obviously, but we know that they have a much more open platform now in the sense of where they allow their games to go, where it financially makes the most sense. So with this in particular for single player games, where they were still developing the PlayStation menu overlay system, and doing cross progression with trophies and PSN login required for those games and having a PSN login bonus. And we were thinking maybe they'll eventually do a launcher, which my personal take has always been they shouldn't do that because nobody's going to end up using it. But they acquired Nixxes Software, which they can do other stuff like Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered or be a support team. But we know that that's problematic even for somebody like Bluepoint, right? Not to open up that can of worms again, but you know that even when a studio you think has a viable path, they can become defunct anyway. So it's weird. I think there's been so many indicators suggesting that supporting PC is really a natural step for the organization, especially because the point I've always made is that PC is a platform that is much different to console buyers than people tend to give it credit for. I mean, these are buyers that they're kind of set in their ways. There's PC players and console players. And you're not, typically I find, not going to get a diehard PC person to go out and buy a PlayStation 5. It hasn't happened. It doesn't happen. And I think it's just better to go to those people and say, here's the game, and make your easy software sale. Because the porting costs are relatively minor compared to what these games are going to end up making. Even the more recent games that we know are probably not doing all that well, the porting costs probably are easily still made up and then some. So it's a weird thing because I think the revenue definitely is consequential, but we haven't really seen anything to prove otherwise that it's actually harming PlayStation or the business. But maybe this is a direct byproduct of new leadership. Hideaki Nishino has been the CEO of the Platform Business Group for a little bit now, and it's funny because we just had this topic on Tuesday for the Herman Hulst should he be fired thing. One of the main points I made in that video is that if you get a different person to fill that role, not much can change immediately because games take so long to make. But PC ports are definitely more of a short-term thing that you could see change in the short term. So maybe it's something from Hideaki Nishino, now that he's got the full reins and we're exiting that Jim Ryan era. I mean, maybe this is part of a more long-term 3-4 year thing that Hideaki's looking to accomplish and kind of double down on PlayStation console hardware again for the single-player epics that they've been so well known for. I don't find that that's actually a bad call either. I'm just, as far as rationalizing business decisions, I would have thought they could keep doing the PC stuff, even eventually do day-and-date PC stuff, and that would not have harmed the PlayStation console platform. Maybe they're also just very aware of what might happen with a next-gen Xbox that can launch Steam and launch PS Studio games, right? They might still consider that a threat, even though there's been so much turmoil going on with Xbox, which we'll talk about later. But I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of ways to look at it. My head's kind of spinning there, but I genuinely did not think this is actually what we would be hearing about. And maybe that's something that they are now heavily considering. I guess we'll have to wait and see what Jason has to report on. Moving on to a big discovery for the God of War franchise and where we think it's going to go, which it seems more and more likely that yes, we are going to the Egyptian pantheon next. So what happened this past week is over on the God of War Ragnarök subreddit, the data miner, the Morse _ revealed that they found hidden cutscene dialogue in the game files for Ragnarök. They essentially found the same thing, the opening for Ragnarök in the 2018 game's code. So references to Atreus finding out that Tyr was alive, for example, which is the primary plot point initially for Ragnarök. So just to stop you here, we are obviously going to cover what may be leaking or spoiling the intro or the main scene going into this mainline entry. So just bear in mind that we're going to be covering some things that sort of telegraph what's going on with the plot points. But anyway, the cutscene dialogue found in the game code is that there's a scene with a character called Robed Figure who talks about Odin and Atreus, saying that Odin failed and Atreus rejected us. The robed figure is then revealed as Athena, who is on a higher plane of existence, which are the voices coming from the rift that we saw in Ragnarök. So there's another opening scene where Atreus is speaking with somebody named Mao, and they can only say their name, Mao. So the dialogue is this. Atreus says, "Wake up, I think we're close." Mao, "Hey, you insisted on coming along. Come on, let's have a look." Mao, "I hope you're right. Sounds like we've found it." So the revealing thing here is that Mao is Egyptian for cat, and they're also one manifestation of the sun god Ra. And then this is something that Atreus has the ability of, which is communicating with animals on that sort of, that's like one of his powers as far as mythology goes. So it's a fascinating thing. What I think really telegraphs this a lot is that the opening sequence and some early dialogue lines and things like that were in the 2018 game's code, and that pretty much told us, okay, that's what Ragnarök ends up doing, right? The opening sequence is in 2018, and so now the Ragnarök game has the sort of opening baseline for where they want to take the story into the next mainline entry. So, I mean, it's in the game code. As far as we know, that it doesn't get much better of a source than that. Now, plans do change, obviously. This could go in a very different direction, but I think it's pretty well known with Santa Monica that they've had a decent idea of where they want to take the franchise, because they decided a while ago, for example, that God of War Ragnarok is going to be like the game's going to end there. Like, Ragnarok is going to wrap up the Norse mythos right there, and so they will move on, and we've had rumors about them going to the Egyptian pantheon. I think it's just more about, okay, now what do they do in that pantheon, and then having Athena in there. So there's, like, story-wise, I think they've got some crazy places they can go. I think the bigger question is simply, how far away is this game? Because as far as we are hearing, it sounds like the thing that we're expecting this summer for a reveal is not a mainline entry. So this game still might be very far away, especially with the game after Corey's title is going to be the remakes, which might not have too long of a dev cycle, but still that would infer that this Egyptian God of War game is very far away. Next up, we have some things going on for Kojima Productions, which could be related to Physant. It's hard to say, but what we do know is that Kojima has been airing this out publicly on their X account. So the order of events here is that recently Kojima showed that SIE did a site visit to the studio, and for weeks Kojima has been editing a new trailer, and he always talks about that on his personal accounts, but that was before the State of Play. So naturally fans were thinking that that was the DS2 PC trailer, and sure enough that did show up at the State of Play. But after that took place, he was still posting pictures about editing a trailer or some kind of footage. Then he said he finished it on the 19th, and then on the 24th, when SIE came to visit, he also posted about how the trailer he was editing, they watched it all together. So SIE doing a site visit, he was editing a trailer, then he's showing it off to them. So it could be a routine thing where they're seeing some new footage for the game that they signed on. I mean, this can't be OD, unless, I mean, it could have been something as simple as, oh, by the way, would you like to see a new OD trailer, which the game is not confirmed for PS5, but we were always thinking that it would eventually come over. So maybe they were there to see very closed behind-the-scenes Physant stuff, and they saw OD, but I don't know, it's very obvious that he was showing SIE something related to Physant, and, like, the game is still far away, but we still saw, like, a poster, we saw announced casting details for it. Like, Kojima is not shy to share a lot of the development process much earlier than other studios tend to do, and he kind of has that autonomy to do that stuff outside of SIE's own typical way that they show off and announce these games. So maybe Physant, maybe we see something for this game. I don't know if that's soon, but maybe sooner than one would think. Moving on to a new patent filed by Sony Interactive Entertainment, which has been definitely causing some speculation about PSSR 2.0, which we do expect should be showing up at any point now, being made available to developers, and games can ship this year with it. We at least heard it was within the first half of this year, possibly by the end of March, but that's still uneven as far as how do we know if that's going to be just dev kit availability or games will get deployed with this big update for PSSR. But anyway, the patent itself is called Graphics Processing. It was recently published, and it has a patent family dating back to at least a 2024 application date. And it does not name PSSR, obviously, but it does describe a resolution upscaler using a convolutional neural network, which is what PSSR is. So this patent describes real-time quantization of the neural network if the GPU load is too heavy. So the intended solution is smoothing out or avoiding frame drops for native resolution PS5 Pro titles. So developers may now get a use case where PSSR temporarily reduces its reliance on the CNN to keep performance in check. That's at least as far as I understand it, reading through the patent details, but that could be a major breakthrough that they were achieving with PSSR. Sort of 2.0 is how fans are calling it, and I myself, we don't even know if they'll do a sort of more formal announcement and give it a name, like DLSS and things like that when they have bigger release builds, but we'll have to wait and see. The patent itself does definitely show a bigger breakthrough and evolution of the upscaler that Sony has proprietary in-house, but in collaboration with AMD, obviously. Okay, let's get into another massive story that it's one of those things where we would be remiss not acknowledging this as well for what is Sony's historically their biggest competitor in the space. We know Xbox has had a very turbulent life cycle for this console cycle in particular, but really they've had a very interesting path in the games business. And so now they've had a massive shakeup. If this was Let's Talk Xbox, we would go over every single little detail that's come out about this leadership shakeup. We're obviously not going to do that, so we'll give you the very quick cliff notes here for those that want to get brought up to speed. But the story here is Phil Spencer, the Microsoft CEO of gaming. He has officially retired. Sarah Bond, the president of Xbox, she has left the company. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella has appointed Asha Sharma, the former head of Core AI, as the new executive vice president and CEO of Microsoft Gaming. Matt Booty is also getting promoted as executive VP and chief content officer, reporting to Sharma. And Sharma has only been with Microsoft since 2024, and she admits she's not a gamer, but she wants to understand the business, etc., etc. They're already very active on X, responding to people. They claim it's their actual account and it's them posting. And one Xbox fan, getting into the more PlayStation news here, one Xbox fan was pleading the importance of exclusivity for franchises like Halo, Gears, and Forza, and Sharma responded back with, quote, "Hear you." Shortly after, Windows Central got an exclusive interview with Sharma, and when asked about game exclusivity and that strategy, they said, quote, "Right now, I need to learn candidly about the why of these decisions, what we were optimizing for, and what the data shows about the Xbox strategy today. That's the honest answer. I'm looking at lifetime value, not just what happened in a previous moment or in short-term efficiencies and things like that. The plan's the plan until it's not the plan." So a very PR answer. And again, like, it's not Let's Talk Xbox, so we're not going to break down the whole Xbox leadership shakeup thing, even though it's insane, and I have a lot of thoughts on what happened. But that's the thing, is that this is massive, right? Like, Phil has been at Microsoft for such a long time, head of Xbox since 2014, and there's been some scapegoating for Sarah Bond, but obviously the accountability also falls back on Phil, because he's still, like, Bond was reporting to him, and he backed everything that Bond was trying to do initiative-wise. And, like, getting back to the turmoil of the whole Activision Blizzard deal and how much money the company spent on that, where it probably could have been used on AI, you know, then it became the question of, and I thought for a long time, very likely it was probably a sort of civil war within the company, and that Xbox still wanted to stick to a more traditional console business model and not do the crazy stuff like shipping games on PlayStation. Now we have a new CEO that many are deeming very questionable. Famously, one headline from this week, as one of the Xbox co-creators, Seamus Blackley, feels like she's being put in place to sunset the brand. Whereas the things that they're saying right now, just getting the job, she's sort of saying all the right things to appease the existing Xbox player base, but, you know, these are still big companies, so you can't really buy that stuff at face value. And there's next-gen hardware plans that are very deep in motion, right? But there's still the RAM crisis. Like, there's so much going on. This is like crazy tea as far as video game stuff goes. So I think we're all speculating as to what this means. For the PlayStation stuff and still getting Xbox games, I would safely think that is still going to be happening. I don't think that is changing anytime soon. But we got to leave it there, because there's just so many layers to it. Nobody has the answer. But I think the safe thing to say as far as Xbox's future is that they do have a lot of studios. They do release a lot of content. They are pretty much a content company at this point. Like, I think you are still going to see those games ship on PlayStation, but only time will tell in what is probably going to be radically new leadership. Moving on to some not so good news for the French publisher Nacon, where ahead of next week's live stream, Nacon Connect, they've recently announced and confirmed they've filed for insolvency. So the majority shareholder, Big Ben Interactive, defaulted on its debts, so now they're in a really tough spot. So with some financial restructuring, they're trying to navigate cash flow and keep operations going while protecting assets and jobs. And just for a reminder, Nacon is the publisher behind Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, which didn't really deliver, but they've also released Greedfall, Styx, Hell Is Us, RoboCop, and a lot of titles. They're actually a bigger publisher than people tend to think they are. And so it's one of those more higher profile issues with an established publisher in this business where things are just tough. I mean, in this particular case, it's a majority shareholder that can't pay loans, so, you know, it's not always like the same story for these companies that are running into money issues. but oftentimes it does fall on a handful of titles that they put a lot of eggs into one basket. Solar Crown, I think they spent a lot on that game, and well, it's the same story for a lot of others. There was a big story too that came out about High Guard from Jason Schreier with Bloomberg, and well, how that all kind of went, upside down. So Tencent pulled funding for that game after they saw that they probably weren't hitting the player metrics that they needed to retain. And we just see more and more often that these companies are putting a lot of money into titles that are simply not delivering, that the market's just simply too saturated, and it's really, really tough. Moving on to some PlayStation Productions news and another casting update for the God of War Amazon TV series. Now we have our stranger, Baldur, who is played by Ed Skrein, who you might remember from roles like Jurassic World Rebirth and Deadpool, where he played Ajax. So now we have our Baldur, which another casting as far as they don't necessarily need to look like the person, but everybody they've cast so far for this show does absolutely look the part. So if you are a stickler for that kind of thing, I think so far they have done an excellent job with casting. Now they just have to actually deliver on the source material, the roles, and what you expect from those characters in a live-action environment. So I was definitely not sour, but I always said, I want a movie. Just give me a movie. Now with at least knowing that okay, they're going to all look the part, as superficial as that sounds, I'm certainly more on board for what I think they're cooking up here. There's only a handful of people left, too. And, well, a lot of Ragnarök characters still, Thrud. But, yeah, so far it's still looking pretty good. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where 10 of you can win a code for Vampire Therapist on PlayStation 5. I would like to congratulate these viewers right here. I'll be contacting you all very soon via email or X, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you again to Ultimate Games SA for the codes. And now we will be going back to a $10 PSN card giveaway. So if you would like to win, then follow the link down below or scan the QR code, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are some of the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all. And our Tuesday conversation was Herman Hulst, the CEO of the Studios Business Group. How has he been doing? Should he move on, be fired? Is SIE actually happy with his decisions so far for the PlayStation landscape? We talk about that. Coming up on Tuesday, probably another conversation or something as per usual. And also me and John had Click R3, our PlayStation podcast last night. That was live streamed, and that's now archived on the Spawncast channel. And that, I think, is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.